Growing up as an only child, my parents have always been very protective of me. They sent me to private schools and vetted any friend whom I may be spending time with. Because of this, there were very few times I was ever left alone growing up. Looking back on it now, this is something that I should have been grateful for. By the time I was 16 years old, my parents had begun to loosen the restrictions on me, and this resulted in there being more times when I was left to watch the house. I could tell they were initially worried about this, but as time went on and nothing seemed to go wrong, they began to take advantage of the fact that they could finally go out together alone. Considering this gave me freedom that I never had, I took no issues with this. I felt like a man being left to guard the house. Deep down, though, I never truly imagined there would come a day when I ever had to face anything daunting. This day was like any other. My parents were going out for a dinner date to celebrate their anniversary, and I was planning on taking full advantage of the weekend by spending the night online gaming with my friends. As I watched my parents pull out of the driveway, I did what any other kid does when they are home alone. I screamed into the empty house. After asserting my dominance and grabbing some snacks, I ran upstairs to join my friends on Call of Duty. After gaming for about 3 hours, I heard a small creak. After asking my friends if they too heard the noise and getting 3 resounding no's, I decided to step into the hallway and see if I heard the noise again. After hearing nothing, I peeked downstairs and saw nothing. I decided it must have been the wind and resumed gaming with my friends. Not even 1 minute had passed before I heard something that stopped my heart. The sound of shattering glass filled the house. I frantically whispered for my friends to call 911 as I put my headset down and rushed to grab the bat I had by my closet. I ran into the bathroom as quietly as I could and locked myself in. Not quiet enough. I heard one man with a loud voice proclaim that someone was upstairs. The sound of stomping filled the hall as the man ran upstairs, up checking every room. "This one, it's locked," a man yelled. This is it, I thought. There's no way out. They began to beat on the door until I saw the hinges begin to give. If I stayed put, they'd get me. If I opened the door, there's a chance I can make it out. Without thinking, I quickly opened the door and ran, barely making it past the men. I heard the sound of a gunshot as I opened the front door and ran. Blue lights. The police officers had just arrived. I was saved. The officers barged into the house to find nothing but shattered windows and broken furniture. The men heard the sirens and ran. It was at this moment that my parents arrived and embraced me, all 3 of us crying. The men were eventually caught after breaking into 3 more houses that same night. I can't remember a time since then that I stayed home alone. It's not that I can't, it's that I don't want to. The sight of those men etched a memory into my mind that still haunts me to this day. As a college student, it was very typical for me to bounce back and forth between different jobs, trying to find a balance between good pay and little effort. After going through a variety of jobs from Subway to Walmart, I finally found a job which seemed to fit my criteria as a college student. It paid well, and it did not generally require any more effort than simply being present. This job was house sitting, or in other words, watching people's houses while they were away. The typical clients were families or couples going on vacation, and less often older individuals with no one left to turn to for their chores. This particular job was the latter. As I left class, I began to head over to Michael's house, the older gentleman whose house I was watching. The drive was longer than usual, about 45 minutes as he lived pretty far out into the country. I began to get a strange nervous feeling as the houses and cars I passed became further and further apart. I chalked it up to just excess stress from the exam I had just taken, turned on Katy Perry, and finished out the drive. As I pulled into the driveway, Michael was already outside on his porch. I locked my doors, put my keys in my pocket, and greeted Michael with a smile. "Wow, what a pretty young lady you are," Michael said. Though this made me a bit uncomfortable, it wasn't uncommon for clients to say this, especially older, lonelier clients. I thanked him, and we began to discuss the details of the job, the chores, and the rules. This was standard practice for me, so most of the discussion came naturally. That was until he laid out the last and what he called the most important rule. After pausing for a second and staring directly into my eyes, he said, "Do not go into the attic." He then explained that there was a leak inside the attic in a more normal tone, and I decided not to push him on it. Finally, he told me that was all and that he was just waiting for his taxi to take him to the airport. He described sorrowfully the recent passing of his wife and how he was now traveling the world and seeing all of the places they wanted to see. His next stop was Spain. All of the feelings of discomfort subsided and were replaced for feelings of pity. I told him I'd do my best to keep things exactly the way he wanted, and as his ride arrived, he left, and I went inside. I would be spending the next 3 days here, so I made myself comfortable by pulling out some of the food I brought in my bag and turning on the TV. As I sat on the couch, I looked down to see Genevieve, the cat that he owned. I attempted to pet the cat only to be greeted by a heinous hiss. I kicked it away, sort of offended, and resumed watching TV. After a few hours had passed, it was dark, and I decided to take a shower. I grabbed the necessities from my bag and began to make my way upstairs. As I neared the top step, I heard something from above me in what I could only assume was the attic. It did not sound like a leak. The sound of metal scraping against the ceiling as though a chain was being moved shook me to the core. "Hello?" I asked. No response. "Hello?" I tried again, this time being greeted by a scattering sound. It must be some kind of animal, I thought. I tried my best to shake the feeling of extreme discomfort by continuing towards the shower. After I finished my shower, I hadn't heard any noises, so my stress levels subsequently fell. After getting dressed and brushing my teeth, I opened the bathroom door to see the attic hatch open. I stood there, not knowing what to do. The light on the inside had been turned on, and I could only assume it had been on. The door must have fallen open due to a bad hatch or something, I thought to myself. I set my clothes down and thought that I could quickly run up there, turn off the light, and shut the hatch. I had to, right? He would only assume the worst if he saw the attic open. So I put my phone in my pocket and quickly threw my shoes on. I then began to climb the weak ladder that led to the attic. After making my way into the attic, I began to reach for the light to turn it off, as I heard the chain noise again, this time from right behind me. I turned around and screamed at the top of my lungs as I saw a frail, older lady chained up to the wall covered in blood and bruises. She was barely alive and was reaching out for me as if she was asking for help. "I told you not to go into the attic." I turned around and Michael was making his way up the stairs with a hatchet in his hand. "Michael, please, I won't tell anyone. I was just trying to turn off the light," I pled as he made his way up to the top of the stairs. I was trapped alone in a small attic with a crazy man who had chained up his own wife, and I had a feeling I was never going to leave. He was fast for an older man, and I attempted to run as he started towards me. He pulled back his hatchet as he caught up to me and swung. The hatchet stuck into the wall of the attic behind me. He started to attempt to pull it out as I quickly grabbed the nearest object I could find, a wrench. I swung it as hard as I could, striking him in the head. He dropped to the floor with a thud. I collapsed to my knees crying, my head swirling as emotions ran through my mind. I wanted to run. I wanted to leave, but the woman was barely alive, hopelessly chained up in this attic for who knows how long. I didn't know if Michael was temporarily knocked out, or worse. I had to act quick. I used the wrench to strike the base of the chains until one was loose, then two, then the final chain was off. I grabbed the older lady who couldn't have weighed more than 70 pounds. I carried her down the stairs and ran as fast as I could, leaving everything else I had brought behind. After throwing her in the car, I glanced at the house to see Michael standing in the attic, looking down at me, with blood running down the side of his face. I got into the car, started it, and drove off as fast as I could. The lady whom I saved turned out to be his wife, Elizabeth. After taking her to the hospital, she would eventually make a recovery. She would go on to tell the heartbreaking stories of the abuse she experienced throughout their 50 years of marriage. It turned out that she was chained up as a result of her finally trying to leave her abusive husband, Michael. Michael took his own life that same day that we escaped, and after that experience, I never house sat again. Last summer, I experienced a major shift in my life. I went from living with my family in a small town in the South to living in my own apartment in New York City. I was set to start med school in the summer, and I used all of my money as well as some from my parents to make this dream come true. I spent the first couple weeks in New York gearing up for school, meeting new people, and decorating my dream apartment. As school finally came around, I felt as though I had found a home in this extremely busy city. I had a small but growing group of friends, a beautiful apartment, and a burning desire to start my journey of becoming a doctor. School turned out to be as stressful as I thought, but also as fun as I thought. Aside from the late nights which I would sometimes spend at the university library, I would mostly have time every day to go out and experience the city with my friends. Tonight, though, was one of those late nights where I was one of the last students to leave the library. The time was 1:36 a.m., and though I tried to ignore the feeling, I was terrified of walking the 2 blocks through the city at night to make it back home. Regardless, I gathered my things and began the journey home. As I walked along the dark streets, I felt comfort knowing that other students were still sparsely populating the roadside. I made eye contact with one of the guys who was in the library for as long as me. I didn't think much of it, as I had seen him around campus before, though never in class. I finally made it home, and felt relieved, as well as a bit silly for thinking something bad would have happened. I began to fall asleep after thinking for hours about how much I wanted to prove to everyone that I could finish school, that I could be a doctor. I felt furious as I thought back to my grandfather telling a younger me that women are not supposed to go to school, but rather are supposed to be homemakers. I was confronted with the reality of how bad my sleep must have been when I woke up feeling awful. Nonetheless, I quickly set off for school as I was later than I'd like to be. Then I saw him again. Trailing slightly behind me was the man that I had shared the library and walk home with. I uncomfortably walked faster until I saw Zoe, a girl whom I had gotten to know well. I told her about the man, and after taking notice of him, she walked with me the rest of the way to class, agreeing that he looked odd and that she hadn't seen him in any classes. A couple hours later, I was finishing up my work in the library as I noticed the man turned away from me 2 tables up, reading a book that did not look familiar to any medical class that I know of. Trying to convince myself that it's all in my head, I decided to just leave early and get a good night's rest. I felt relieved as I didn't notice him leaving with me. This sense of relief lasted me all the way until I got home, as I made it without any notice of the man. I decided to stick with my original plan and get some sleep, which came very easy to me as I was already feeling very deprived. I woke up to my door handle shaking violently. I checked my phone to see the time was 1 a.m. I panicked and ran to the door as quietly as possible to check the peephole. It was the man. He had a tool and he was trying to get into my apartment. I screamed for him to go away. "Open the door," he yelled. I yelled again, thinking my cries would scare him away. I called the cops, shaking, telling them everything they needed to know, as I heard him still trying to get in. They informed me that they had units on their way and to stay calm. "I called the cops," I yelled as loud as I could. No response, only continued attempts to open the door until I heard it. The door handle opened as the lock gave way. He was in. I kicked and pushed back as hard as I could, but it was futile. He grabbed me and began to drag me, until I saw the door of my neighbor's apartment open. He had a weapon, and he screamed at the man to let me go. This time, the man ran. I laid on the floor, feeling completely helpless, as the man who saved me reassured me that it was okay. The cops arrived and informed me that the man had been caught as he tried to leave the building. I moved in with some friends staying in the city, and to this day I do not go anywhere alone. I wouldn't recommend anyone try traversing these cities alone. There's too many people and too much danger.